Aethelwulf was born in 795 in Aachen, the son of Egbert, who was about 25 when his young son was born. His father Egbert would go on to become king of the West Saxons, as explored in our previous video. Aethelwulf himself was king of the West Saxons for around 19 years, from 839 to 858. Though he died in 858, he was effectively deposed by his eldest son, 2 years before his death. Aethelwulf is important not only because he was the father of Alfred the Great, but because he formed part of a dynasty of West Saxon kings who went on to unite England and create the very first kings of England. To put him into the context of our timeline, Aethelwulf was on the throne about 1,200 years ago. At the time of his birth, Aethelwulf's father Egbert was in exile, living in the Frankish court under the protection of King Charlemagne. For an explanation as to why he was in exile, we recommend you watch our previous video on the life of King Egbert. In 802, when he was still a small boy, Aethelwulf's father was crowned king of the West Saxons, one of 7 kingdoms in England at the time. In 825, as a young man, he was sent by his father to command the Wessex army during an invasion of Kent, an event which led to the submission of Essex, Sussex and Surrey to Wessex. After these victories, Aethelwulf was appointed sub-king of his father's eastern territories, giving him valuable training for his future role as king. At some point, he married Queen Osburga, who it's thought bore him 6 children, 4 of which would go on to become kings of Wessex, including Alfred the Great. In 839, Aethelwulf ascended to the throne following the death of his father, Egbert. One of Aethelwulf's achievements was to contain Viking attacks. Viking raiders had been active for decades by the time he ascended to the throne, and the Danes seem to have started stepping up raids in the 840s. In 851, 350 ships sailed up the Thames and took London before moving on to Canterbury. The Vikings then moved on to Surrey, where they were wiped out by Aethelwulf at the Battle of Aclia, the location of which is unknown. At the height of his power in 855, Aethelwulf decided to make a pilgrimage to Rome with his young son Alfred, later the Great, who would then have been a small boy, possibly 6 or 7 years old. While he was away, he left his eldest son, Ethelbald, in charge of Wessex, and his other son, Ethelbert, in charge of Kent. Journeying from Rome in the 800s would have been a huge time commitment. Today, the trip from London to Rome can be undertaken in a few hours. Then, travelling via foot, horse and cart, the journey would have taken weeks, as much as 2.5 months. Aethelwulf stayed in Rome for a year, but on his return in 856, his eldest son Ethelbald refused to give up the throne. Possibly to avoid civil war, Aethelwulf, by then around 60 years of age, didn't resist and continued to rule Kent and some of England's eastern provinces. He died in 858 and was buried at Stenning in Sussex. In the next video, we'll take a look at the life of Aethelwulf's next 3 successors, his sons Ethelbald, Ethelbert and Ethelred. All 3 were older brothers to Alfred the Great, who we'll cover in a subsequent video. Please remember to hit the subscribe button below to receive an alert when we upload our next video. You can also support us via Patreon using the link below.